So I'm going to go through the apart from ethical issues, briefly evaluate the methodology of Milgram's research into obedience. So one thing not to do is start talking about ethical issues because it says apart from ethical issues. So don't do that. And it's asking you to evaluate strengths and weaknesses of the methodology of Milgram's research. Now, a lot of people got confused about what this word means, methodology. It's like method, it's like the way it's being done. So if you think about Milgram's research, it's a lab experiment. So essentially this question is like the strengths and weaknesses of a lab experiment, but obviously in the context of Milgram. So that is literally all it's asking you to do. So my advice would be to do a strength and a weakness. I think you can get all marks for 1 point, but it'd have to be really detailed and amazing. So it's unlikely that that's ever going to happen. So because it's in exam conditions and stuff. So just to kind of secure the marks, do 2 points. So if we think about a lab experiment, a massive strength of a lab experiment is that you can control for variables and also that you can easily replicate it and check for reliability. So there's 2 separate points there. I think my favourite one would probably be the replication one, because technically in Milgram it's a bit iffy in terms of the IV. So the point about establishing causality is a bit iffy. I mean, AQA will give it you, but if you're on another specification, they won't give it you because technically Milgram doesn't have an IV, but we don't kind of teach it that way. But anyway, I'll do a couple of points and then you can kind of choose which ones are most appropriate for what you've done, and then you can maybe adapt them and choose different ones. But let's start with one of them. So a strength of Milgram's methodology due to the control and standardization, such as, so this is really important that you put such as or for example, because this is linking it to the Milgram research. Otherwise, it's a generic point about, you know, whatever study. So it's going to be specific. So by putting examples of the study, you can do that. So such as the to each learner, such as you must continue the methodology is due to the cost. It can be replicated. This ensures that the results of 65% to 450 volts I think that's it. A strength of Milgram's methodology is that due to control standardization, such as the prods given to each learning, you must continue. It can be easily replicated. This ensures that the results of 65% of participants obeying to 450 volts, obeying to give a 450 volt shock to learner are reliable. Can you see there how I just like added in a couple of other words? It just like beefs it up a bit, which means that it's a better answer because you've got kind of like more references to the study. That's basically what you need to do to get kind of like the full mark. So that there will get you 2 marks, easy. A weakness of Milgram's methodology is that due to it being conducted in a laboratory setting, as being asked to read out word pairs and then shock someone in another room when they get it incorrect is not something that people would do. everyday life. Therefore, the results of 65% obeying false. In fact, you know what? I'm going to change it because we've already said that. 100% obeying to 300. Validity. Ingredients. So, with this weakness one, what I tend to see a lot of is a weakness of Milgram's methodology is that because it's in a lab, the results lack ecological validity, and that's it. Now, that's fine, you're right, it'll probably get you a mark, but it's not going to get you the full 2 marks because there's just not enough explanation of why that's the case. There's not kind of an explanation or an engagement with the study. It's very generic and it's not really linked to kind of like what that tells you about explaining obedience. So on this one, you can see I've got, it's conducted in laboratory setting, which is artificial, so that's kind of the point, but I've got this such as again, and I've actually mentioned very, very briefly what the actual procedure of the study is. So it's very clear that I'm talking about Milgram and I'm not talking about some, random study, because you can use this point all the time and all you need to do is substitute the procedure in this bit. So like if you would just substitute that with like another study procedure, you can use the exact same point. So once you've kind of got the bones, the kind of structure of the point, you just kind of substitute it in the application, which is a skill, which is why AQA tests you like this. It's not something that they would do in everyday life. I mean, it's not, is it? I mean, if you think about Milgram's study, is it really telling you about how people obey an authority figure in everyday life? Probably not. Like it's quite, I mean, you don't even have to put this. This is just like a basic answer. If you wanted to be even more specific and get like a better answer, which you don't necessarily need to get the marks, but if you want to show off, you can kind of mention that being in a kind of novel situation with an authority figure that you don't really know, is that really representative of how you would behave in everyday life? Because the authority figures that are around you might know them. I mean, not all the time. I mean, I suppose an authority figure like a police officer or somebody like that, then yeah, it's probably applicable to that, but not to a situation like in a classroom with a teacher who you've known all year. It's a very different kind of dynamic, that. And so it's not going to be applicable to real world obedience. So you can kind of go into loads of detail like that, but it isn't necessary to kind of get the marks. And again here, therefore the results, usually students just stop there and they don't actually mention or reference any of the results. And technically in this answer, you wouldn't necessarily need to do it again because you have already mentioned it and they are marked holistically. But if you want to like definitely make sure that the examiner doesn't miss the fact that you've referred to the results, then just, bob it in. And as I showed you before, I was going to do the same one, but I thought I'll just do a different one to show that I've got more knowledge. Increases the banding of the question, because questions like these are banded. So you might have kind of put points in, but if it's not like explained in detail and being effective, then you can't really get in that top band. Lacks ecological validity, which a lot of people always put, but the key thing here is that it doesn't represent obedience in real life, so you've got to kind of finish that off. So quite a difficult question, that one, really, to get all the marks for, but it is testing that skill of evaluation and specifically about the methodology. If you talked about anything to do with just general things about like replication studies that had been done or anything like that, you wouldn't have got any marks for it, because it has to be about the methodology, so the fact that it's a lab experiment and what the strengths and weaknesses are of those. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just do the strength for the control one, because a lot of people do put that one. And I'll just copy and paste it and just show you where you can briefly change it, and then it'll be inappropriate for control. So strength of Milgram's methodology is that due to the control standardization, such as that, I'm going to put causality can be easily established. This ensures that the results are valid. That's literally all you've got to change to make it from a reliability point into a validity point. So you've got to replace replicate with causality, and you've got to replace reliability with validity. They are not the same thing, but I can understand why you would get confused, because they are structured kind of similarly. You can use the same examples, that kind of thing. You can go into more detail on here because you can say things like what extraneous variables are controlled for, but you'd have to think of a specific extraneous variable if that's what you were going to use, which is a little bit more difficult. So if you go with standardization, everything's the same. I mean, you've said that causality is established, so it doesn't really make much difference. So that'd be enough to get the marks. You can obviously go into more detail, but it's not necessary. You'll get the marks anyway. Obviously, if it was more than 4 marks, you would go into more detail, but you don't need to. So you only need 2 of these. You don't need all 3.